So, a lot of the videos so far have been around some of the major emotions that we kind of grapple with as we develop into the universe. And by saying that, I mean almost thinking about ourselves outside of ourselves. So, how we are relative to the world, and then how we are within ourselves, and then trying to put the two together with technology is almost like, whoa, like how do we put that together? So, one of the things I talked about last video was technology that helps us with medicine. So, I talked about laser eye surgery. Some people who work with medical equipment know that sometimes when people have certain kinds of surgeries, they can almost watch how they do their surgery and they can decide, well, because we're engineers and we like medicine, like engineering is usually a way of working with machines and metal and engines and putting them together to almost help support what humans naturally do. And the reason that they do this is they say, well, machines can do things that humans can do with more efficiency, which means with less error. And sometimes that gives humans a break. So they're not really stressed if they have to do like a really big job. So think about somebody who is doing plastic surgery. Sometimes people, when they're I talked last time about fire. So imagine right now there's somebody who, for some reason, they got stuck in some kind of fire. So they were in a house and it was burning, and maybe part of their hand burned. So they go to the hospital, and some burns are worse than others. And sometimes, if you go to the hospital and then they let the burn heal, like it didn't actually ruin your skin, but then it left actually a scar. Like I have some scars on my hands, and some of them they're just like whatever. It's like it's not a big deal. But some of them they look like they're reminders that kind of hurt you, just because they're like, I don't want to have to keep remembering this scenario every time I look at my hands. So then you can do plastic surgery, and plastic surgery is when you go to a special kind of doctor who's called a specialist, and he understands how to almost take parts of our skin in different areas and almost it's almost like cut and paste. You can think about it, but it's with your skin, so we have to obviously be a little bit more careful. And they find different areas on your body that are maybe a little bit hidden, and they just cover part of the skin with other skin maybe, and then they stitch it up, and then it doesn't look like anything happened. So um, some engineers might think maybe there's a machine that can help some of these surgeons work on this kind of specialty in medicine. So because they're able to work with this, some might call these machines almost like kind of robots, and they'll have specific names so that people don't just call all the machines robots, and then nobody knows what machine does what. So when we say a robot, it's really hard to say what that means anymore. Like when I was growing up, a robot was basically a toy that could move on its own, and it might have a remote controller, so you can turn it one way and you can turn it the other way, just the way some remote control cars are. Sometimes you have airplanes that do that now. So it's kind of goes back to that story or that book I had borrowed from the library about mindset, where oftentimes it's just our new and innovative ideas that we think about usually sort of start as like an idea that's like maybe it's just a toy, like I just want to think about it, and we just make a small model of it, and then eventually with time, we the more we think about it and the more we learn and the more we do research, the more we think, well, let's try to build a real one and see what happens. That's basically what happens. So sometimes while we're doing this, if we haven't actually been um, thinking about the way people learn, and we don't know very much about history, we almost forget that learning with books and thinking with a lot of people and going to the library to study is actually a really, really big job, and it's not an easy one. So to try to remember that with being somebody who just is growing up into the world right now, who's maybe 20, maybe 21, the way you're growing up right now, everything around you is technology. Like it feels like everything's a mini robot somewhere. And outside of that, it's just people who are talking to you and probably still on the phone, and they can tell you about all these cool little apps that help you do shortcuts everywhere. So for you to think about how, for example, when they go to school, they're able to create a really big, like, article. Like usually an article you think is like a few pages, like maybe 5 or 10 pages. But then if you think an article is this much, this many pages in a book, then it becomes almost like a booklet. It's a lot of information. So if you think somebody's able to do that and they're able to do it in a very short amount of time, then you're like, I want to be able to learn how to do that. And they can say, oh, it's really easy now. I can show you. And then they maybe go on the computer and then they say, look, you just have to buy this software, which means there's this, you can go to one of these business stores and then you download this information onto your computer or your laptop. And then it shows you all the different ways that it can maybe pull information out of the internet really quickly. And it can help you almost understand how to think about certain things and how to put the information together. And that way you're not doing all that research on your own. And that's it. You've kind of created your little booklet. Now, some of the things that we need to remember about this is that a lot of the books that we have from the past, we actually put into a digital form, which means we've put it maybe into a CD so that you don't actually have to go and find the actual book itself. You can just find it somewhere on the internet or like on a CD that you buy or on a library that has it stored somewhere, and you just have to pay some money, like a subscription fee. And then you can begin your research. So once you start doing that, you can actually kind of decide, I want to kind of just stay in front of my computer and I want to spend all this time inside just figuring out all the different ways that I can think of questions to ask. And as you're doing that, you'll almost realize that I can almost spend a lot of time doing this. And if I don't go outside and play or change my environment, this could actually be very unhealthy for my body. So then you can think, okay, that's true. Sitting in front of a computer for a very long time could strain my eyes, can actually cause problems for my body, especially if I'm not exercising and moving the way my posture is. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go outside and then I'll just go for a walk. And maybe on your walk, you'll decide, you know what, I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to see if I can find some of the books that I'm actually reading about on the software program that I got. And when you go to the library, you decide that, I'm not even going to look on the computer to see what books I'm looking for. I'm just going to walk around in the library and see. And as you're walking, you're like, oh my goodness, you find these new books that have new ideas. And you're like, I never would have thought to connect these two ideas together. And then all of a sudden, your brain is thinking like, it's starting to think laterally now. It's not focused on just one idea. It's actually starting to branch out, kind of like what we were talking about with creative thinking. And then you're like, oh my gosh. And you just sit down and you're just like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about software. I'm going to get back to it later. And you're reading and then new ideas come to you. And then you think, wait a minute, I want to go back further in history. And then you can go to a section in the library that's called the archives. And the archives are basically a part of the library that they keep really, really old books that they have kept kind of in a safe spot because they keep the air a little bit controlled so that the paper doesn't kind of disintegrate or dissolve. And because with the more use you have of something, the more it wears out. And they want to preserve these books. Almost say like, wow, imagine we have this book from like how many, like 1,000 years ago, and we still have it. And this is almost proof that these people used to think in this way, and we've evolved from this time. So by doing this, now you're understanding, wait, how did we go back to that software and how did they build it? And then you might read about it and find out that this is called artificial intelligence, which means somebody who's really knowledgeable about a subject decides that I'm going to go on the internet and find all the different ways that people think about how to build a shed in their backyard, right? So maybe these are the reasons that they want to build a shed because they have a lot of space and they like to have almost extra space in their home, so they don't have to worry about always moving things around at home. So all of a sudden, they start to write all the ways that people like to have extra storage, and then they think about all the creative ways that people like to put things in their storage space, and all the things they like to store, and all the things they like to buy. So it's almost like the software is built to look for keywords in certain articles that people write and put on the internet. So it's talking about interests now and hobbies, right? So let's pretend you're researching something about, I want to find out the best way to learn how to learn a hobby, right? So it's going to be a very, very difficult answer for this software to find. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, like I can just give you the whole software to read, like just give you article and you can decide. So you have to be more specific. And in that way, it's almost very limited in what it can tell you. It's almost like, well, maybe you need to go and experiment with some of the things that you actually like doing. And then you'll find out, well, maybe I should think about what are some fun things to do in the summer if you're a 10-year-old? And then it could be like, oh, that's easier. And then it'll say, okay, now I have to think about, maybe you need adults there. Maybe you don't need adult supervision. Maybe it's something that you already have that you just need to buy extra things for. So in that way, you understand how your focus is getting more and more narrow and more specific to who you are. But then when you go to the library, you might find like just a random book somewhere and you'd be like, I never would have thought of that. And then you start to think, I want to go back and figure out what the pioneering idea for this was. And now you've opened up like a whole new way of thinking about something that you never would have maybe thought about with software. So this is what people who maybe are new to the world right now, who may be in their 20s, and have been just relying on technology all their life, might not really know that this is really something they should maybe think about trying to do sometimes. Because by trying something that we used to do a long time ago that we might maybe not do as much now because of technology, almost allows us to have the opportunity to think about new ideas that are new for our time, and were maybe new a long time ago, but we just kind of forgot about them because we didn't think they were useful. But now they might be useful because now a lot of people can learn a lot of things and build content, share it on YouTube or like on any kind of social platform, and then it can become a trend. And then before you know it, you've got a lot of people who support you and want to join you in it. And it's just like, oh, I just found this by chance. And that could be just because you had that kind of inspiration in your heart that was like, just try to almost like pull all the different parts of your holistic well-being together. So if you're going to be somebody who likes to research a lot, make sure that you're also letting your body take its comfort, which means it needs exercise. So even if you're a person who likes to sit down for a long time, make sure you also go outside and play. So because you had that just kind of inspiration and charity with yourself, God was like, oh, well, because you did that, I'm going to help you find what you're looking for anyway. So now you just got like that bonus, or like that almost reward for your charitableness with yourself. So now you understand why it's very important to love yourself in that way, because God's almost saying, it's so easy to reward you for appreciating that you love what God created. So it's like saying, thank you for creating me the way you did, God. And then in that way, you build up good karma. So while you're doing this now, let's pretend you ended up in the library and you found this new subject. Maybe that's not included in the software program that you bought. Then you can actually go home afterwards and then you can say, I want to find out like who built the software. And then you can message them and say, you know what, I love the software that you built and I love the way you created this artificial intelligence that helps us really take a lot of shortcuts about finding out new things in life. And here's a subject that maybe you should add that's maybe not very popular in the internet yet, or it used to be, but it kind of faded out and died out. And maybe we should have another look at it. And I'm sure, they'll give it some thought and they're like, okay, we'll test it. And they'll maybe put an idea or two on the internet. And then people will search for it and then maybe find something that you put on there. And then like all of a sudden, all these people start joining and wanting to find out about it. And then there you go. You already built or helped build some kind of beneficial knowledge in the world. And then, so you get good karma. And then the person that built the software might be like, hey, do you want to come work with us? And then you're like, whoa, cool, I just got a job. So this is how we love to understand how human nature works and how it's really cool to integrate science and understand how if God's showing us a way in the world to be, we are allowed to be scared about some things like technology and like, wait, how safe is technology? And then, there's pros and cons because again, sitting for too long is not healthy. All that eye strain with some lights and being really close to something makes your eyes weaker. Excuse me. So then you actually have to get glasses or something. And sometimes it gives you headaches. So it's almost to help you understand that everything in life is always going to have something that's good and bad. So doing a lot of the same thing is never a good idea. You should always have variety. So back to technology, I had talked, I think in one last bit, a few videos ago about how we like to genetically modify things. So for example, if we have, let's say we have a lot of kinds of apples that we know that are very, very popular. Like I'm going to say Red Delicious because they're crispy and they can be soft, but people just like them because they're very sweet. Now, some people might say, you know what, I like soft apples, but I don't like them that sweet. I like them kind of tart, which means they're not really sour, but they're not really sweet either. So what sometimes people do is they actually, like scientists, what they'll do is they'll find a fruit in nature that's tart, like maybe a lemon. And then they'll almost see like, how can we put these two fruit together somehow and make a new kind of fruit? right? So it's called genetically modified, which means it's not naturally grown in nature, but it actually exists. Like we can think of the idea, so it exists as an idea, and then we can wonder, well, let's see if we can try to figure out what plants do and then create something new. So some people, if they believe in science, but they also believe in religion, they might say, no, I don't think we should play with nature like that. And they might look in the Quran and find like, with the prophet, like what? And they try to find answers, and then they might give up and be like, nah, I don't know. And they're just like, no, I don't want to try it. Someone else might be like, well, I want to try. And they might pray about it and kind of like, I hope like I'm guided in some way to help me understand if I should do this. And another person who also believed in the universe is like having a way of aligning and opening up a path might say, yeah, I want to try too. And they might actually open the Quran and just be like, this is my first time, but I want to look and see something about what it says about fruits. And you'll actually find that God does describe heaven by saying that in heaven, you will find fruit that looks like a lot of the fruit that you used to eat, but it doesn't taste like what you remember it tasting. So it's almost saying that there will be a time. So this is 1400 years ago in the desert. I don't know what kind of fruit they had then, other than maybe dates and figs. So it's almost telling them already, you're going to find in the future things that you wouldn't have even imagined eating and really enjoying because they're so delicious. And even if you do find something that looks like what you used to have, you're going to find it tasting even better. So it's almost like there's always going to be something to improve on, even if it looks like, I don't know if this is a good idea. So it's almost like you're allowed to be nervous about it. You're allowed to pray about it. You're allowed to kind of delay gratification and say, I'm just going to wait and maybe give myself some time, and maybe I'll find a different hobby until something decides to kind of open up a way for me. And in that way, you're giving yourself a fair chance, but you're also giving your time to almost relax about it enough. And maybe someone else is already thinking about the same idea too. And then by accident, you guys end up meeting up and being like, I used to think about doing that, but I wasn't sure how. And do you mind if I maybe like get some ideas about what you're doing, and maybe we can work together? And there you go. It's really that encouraging when you find that the universe almost always reinforces itself for you in that way. Your faith just builds, and you don't want to say that science and faith and God and religion, it doesn't all connect in some way. Some people don't really want to talk about it that way because they're still thinking about it. And that's very important to remember and respect, because it's a lot of brain work and a lot of kind of thinking. So now we've talked about fruit. Now imagine humans, people who want to say, well, I know about robots and different kinds of machines, and that's useful technology. So what about humans and what we understand about how a human can develop? Like, should we allow shortcuts for how humans grow? And I think that's a very important question, because when you think about a baby that's growing in the mom's stomach, sometimes it is born really early, and doctors know that, well, you know what, if we can almost have a place for the baby to sleep that almost is as warm as a mom's stomach, then it actually survives, and it lives for a very long time and a very healthy life. But that's not quite the same as having somebody who's living decide, I don't mind being a volunteer and having the inside of my bone almost kind of examined. And then, because inside the bone, there's this kind of tissue that's genetic tissue, and it's very specific to who we are. It's almost like that software, but it's for our body. And it almost has all the information that say that your eyes are going to be this color. Even people from before in your past might have had colored eyes that are maybe lighter brown, maybe darker brown. Maybe some of them came from different countries. So you might have some people who married from different parts of Europe, for example. So you might have a little bit of green eyes in your life, or like in your genetic material. Some were tall, some were short. All that is actually in the inside of your skeleton. So the inside of your bones, the bone marrow. So someone might volunteer and say, yeah, take my genetic material and see if you can make another person like me, which is called a clone, right? So then you might think, I don't see why there's a problem with that. I think that'd be kind of cool. So the reason that people think about this is because they think that having a twin in real life is really cool, because some people are born like that. Some people, like I know a friend of mine who had identical twins, which means that they're two girls and they look almost exactly the same, which means their genetic material on the inside of their bones is very similar. It's almost identical, basically. So they might say, yeah, I want someone like that in my life. But then you're thinking, are they actually going to be like a full human like me? So you have to wonder, like, I don't know. Because when you go back to that story about Aladdin, you think, I don't know, like, I don't know anything about the spirit. I don't know anything about the soul. Now, am I going to be messing with jinn, like spirits? Because if people are kind of sleeping, because if they've died and they're trying to wake up again, and I'm creating something that's supposed to look like an adult, but it's not quite a baby. And when people are born, they're usually babies. Like, I don't know, am I going to be messing with like spirits in the animal kingdom? And then so now that we know this information, it's almost like, oh, I have to understand like ethics and like, okay, wait, let's go back to the scientific method. So my guess is this might be something I have to really think about for a long time. So I maybe shouldn't just volunteer right away. And then you have to think, well, what's the method? Like, what would I do? So you'd have to first understand that scientists, they usually have an ethics board, which means they have a group of people and their only job is to make sure that something is very safe to do before they're allowed to do it. And usually the government's involved and very, very knowledgeable people about history and experiments and safe ways of actually dealing with the human body. And then if they say, well, we'll think about it, then you have to think about the purpose. Like, why are we doing this? Like, why don't we just have like regular babies? Like, what's the point of having a clone? Wouldn't it be kind of cool to have the opportunity of meeting somebody who's a little bit different, but who likes me for who I am and I like them for who they are, and then it's diversity and we get to learn something new about each other. That's a choice. And then you might think, okay, well, even if we go ahead with it, what's the conclusion? Like, what are we going to learn? And that's another question. It's almost like I don't know. Like I'm just curious. And so then it has to become, okay, well then we have to see what are the consequences that might be negative? Like how might this harm nature in some way or harm the universe? Because if you're in that neutral position, you should probably think of all the things that could go wrong then. Because if you end up having a lot of things that could go wrong more than things that could go right, it's probably an idea that maybe we are not quite neutral and we should probably change our mind about this project. So the reason I talk about this again is because robots is something that's new right now, and it's something that's almost very, very cool. Because if you think that I mentioned that sometimes people get paralyzed or they lose a limb in some way, and people can create prosthetic arms so that they have an arm that basically moves and helps them live as though they didn't lose their arm. So that's really cool that we have that technology that helps people be independent and remain part of the world, and they don't feel like they have to compromise on any kind of autonomy that they have. So wondering about these questions at any age, I think, is really important, and it helps us create, again, that sense of capability that we can do this and we can be independent, and we do all have valid ideas, but we have to remember that we do need support, and the more people that can support ideas without immediately saying no, the better, because then we feel safe with the ideas that we have, and then we also have safe ideas to replace them. So if I know that for sure this idea is not going to be a good one because a lot of people said that, then I'm not going to feel like I think they're all wrong and I'm going to be sneaky and do it anyway. Because the more people that agree on something, the more maybe, yeah, maybe it's not the time, and maybe I'll just write it down, and then in the future, maybe the time will change and it will become a safe idea, but maybe for now it's not. So all of these things are very encouraging to almost help us allow ourselves to build trust in the universe and with each other, and then in science, because we shouldn't write off anything entirely. It's always just little bits here and little bit there, and then maybe in the future we'll change our mind. So keep that in mind, and I'll see you again next time.